Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode 291 for Monday, April 1st, 2024. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all major podcast platforms, including YouTube. If you're enjoying the show, consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this. My name is Jonny, but the internet knows me as Pixel Riffs, and joining me, as always, is an increasingly active Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
And if you would like to hear about our spring workout plans coming into what hopefully will be a less rainy April than it has been in March, then you should listen to the Render Distance. You might pick up some tips. You might be able to chime in our community and let us know what you're doing in the springtime to stay active. And that is the extended version of the podcast. The Render Distance is something you can listen to via the Patreon page at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Any support will get you access to the Discord and access to the extended version of the podcast that we do every week. It's about 10 to 30 minutes, depending on how much time we have. But you get insights into a little bit behind the scenes. The post show is very often an extended version of the Minecraft chat that we have during the main show. So sometimes we can't fit everything in and we kind of squeak it in at the tail end. So it's a lot of fun. You also get access to things like the monthly Minecraft Hangout, which we recorded for March this past weekend. It has not yet been published on the Patreon page, but it will be soon. So you can always listen to those later. There's a link to the notes and all the wonderful screenshots that we get from our community. We hung out with the community on Saturday and talked about what they've been building in Minecraft. Coming up this April, we have the quarterly hangout. That is where Jonny and I get together and talk about the downloads, the data, the plans for the podcast, all that kind of stuff. So that's going to be coming up in the next couple of weeks. We'll be letting our patrons know when that is coming. Other than that, there's not a lot of schedule changes coming in the next few weeks, but keep your eyes and ears peeled because you never know what might be coming down the tubes.
Yeah, the most exciting news is that as of this morning, we've been able to firm up a date for Ulraf, Minecraft developer Ulraf, to come on the show to talk about the addition of the mace, which is something I think he worked on directly. He certainly looked very enthusiastic about it in the episode that Minecraft posted on YouTube where they were discussing the addition of the mace. So Ulraf should be joining us for the next show on April 8th. If that doesn't work out for whatever reason, then we'll try and have him on the show at some point this month while the mace still feels relevant to the current discussion. It still feels fresh and new, and people are still going out and trying to bonk everything on the head. In the meantime, though, look forward to that, and now we're going to get into our login about what's new in our Minecraft lives. So Joel, why don't you go first? What's new on the Citadel?
So I've spent the last week doing a pretty singular task. There was different sections across different days, but I basically worked out the remaining points of interest and details along the West Hill River. I'll share some before screenshots and some after screenshots in our Discord live chat. And I'm really happy with the way that this came out. You've got different things along the river, everything from making an adjustment to the base of the bridge, the East Bridge, and then making big adjustments like big rock outcrops, the landscaped wooden stair river access point behind the West Hill River Inn, to secret entrances into tunnels, small rock outcrops, a little custom tree here and there, natural fishing hole, more of a customized boat dock, like something with a little bit more river access, and then the blending of textures and landscaping in between. So something that I've been trying to do over the last few weeks is grab a point of interest, make it very unique, and make it my own. Like do all the texturing and the custom bushes and stuff, and then kind of dither that out into the landscape, and then work on the next point of interest and do the exact same thing. And then in between, I've just developed this technique of running through with a bunch of bone meal, removing all the flowers, replacing them with ferns, and then hitting a few areas with too tall grass and too tall ferns to help cover up the brown dirt sides in places and just help the riverbanks feel more lush. A lot of times when you see riverbanks out in the wild in a hike or something like that, they're just covered with vegetation right down to the riverbank because there's just water and nutrients everywhere. And so it helps everything feel very green. And now that I've taken some overhead shots with the combination of the riverbed having already been done with bone meal and seagrass, and now these custom bushes and trees and all this different stuff, it's really starting to feel like an environment. It's not necessarily something that pulls your eye in a distracting way as you walk by. It's more like when you're walking down the road, you're seeing West Hill, you're walking towards West Hill, but the whole like farming area and the river valley doesn't feel devoid of activity or empty of life. The fact that there's a boat at the fishing dock is just like, oh yeah, so it's still in use. There's obviously people around. This is obviously a small community of farmers or whatever. And so I'm looking forward to finishing up the other side, because right now that's all on the one bank of the river is all on the left hand side of the main north road. The right hand side is a bunch of farms, one of which is finished, but the other two are not. So I still have to do that. But that's going to be really cool when you're walking down that road and there's going to be a full range of crops on one side and then all the river vegetation on the other. And so that was the majority of the week, was just working on that. It's not difficult. It's just time consuming. Yeah. I think that's the thing, is that it's something that I feel needs to be done in my perfectionist brain. It's not overly challenging, but it's very rewarding at the end, because you have that. I don't want to say groomed, because my idea is to make it look like it's not groomed, like it's not touched by players. It's more like it's more of a natural overgrowth, but I'm really liking the vibe that it's setting.
Yeah, one of the things I really like about the bigger screenshots, the ones that you have from much further away where the town is sort of in the distance, is the amount of roads there are. Because I think so often we end up with just a single road going to somebody's base area or an area that they're developing. But in real life, you consider the amount of roads that are around just to get people to and from, whether it's different side streets in a town or different areas of like open land like this. You've got walking paths, you've got paths for horses and carts in the area that you're building for. And I think so much of that stuff, you tend to plan minimally for it when you're building in Minecraft, because you're thinking about the practicalities of accessing these as a player. But when you start thinking more about the infrastructure that would be required for a long-term habitation here and like a civilization of people that live there, the need for additional roads becomes so apparent. The same with bridges over the river. They're not just going to use one bridge when they could build another one that would be way more convenient for a different type of traffic. And so you've got a really good balance now of natural landscape, man-made infrastructure, and urban development that I think really completes it as a picture.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that. The idea is definitely there, and I've noticed, for me, even as a player, like as a builder, I added a walking path because like I was making a shortcut. Like I wasn't walking on the road because the road makes a giant U shape on purpose, because it lines you up to walk directly at the main gate, which is one of the focal things of that I wanted to do when I built the place. But when I'm walking back and forth to the inn, or if I'm on foot and I'm not someone in, like, say, a wagon, a horse pulled wagon, I'm not walking all the way around. Like I'm going to cut across the grassy field. So I figured like there'd be at the very least there'd be like a padded mat grass path there. Currently, I think it's just coarse dirt, or maybe it's path block. I can't remember what I left it, but I'm going to texture it in a way that it looks a little bit more natural. And those kind of things I feel help with that kind of immersion, where as a player you're just like, I know that I've walked this path a number of times and I'm skipping over the edge of it, or I'm changing the corner of it. I've actually changed directions of roads in different situations where I'm just like, actually I'm not walking this road all the way around. I don't think anybody else would either. I think it's probably better for me to move this 6 blocks to the left, because I'm absolutely not following the way that it went. But yeah, the bridge thing is also a convenient thing for me too, whereas like I don't necessarily want to be hopping, like I don't want bridges everywhere, because then it kind of defeats the purpose of the river in the first place as any kind of like natural barrier. But there are other situations where like there's a farm on one side of the river where you wouldn't want a bridge just going right into the wheat field. Like it has to connect in some place that makes sense. And so adding those bridges was definitely like a conscious effort to say, okay, well, the farmer's going to want access to the wheat field on both sides. You're going to want to bring, different goods in different areas. And I also like giving roads tiers. This is something that I maybe pulled over from games like Cities Skylines, where you've got main arteries, 4-lane roads, traffic lights, and then you've got residential like stop signs. And in some cases early on, and maybe in more medieval city builders, you'll have like dirt roads and gravel paths and things. And with this, I did the same thing. Like the main road is all bricks, stone bricks, and will eventually have a lot more texture to it as I complete it. But there's farming roads are a little bit more dirt, more coarse dirt, some gravel, some rocks and stones. But like it's mostly like wouldn't be paved, because it's really only a couple of people probably using this for access to certain areas. And so that's been the thought process of it. And I'm trying to keep the I guess the hierarchy of paths and roads in mind, but I'm also trying to keep feature creep just like out of this. Like I do want to finish this before 1.21 comes out. So
Yeah.
the fact that there are just a handful of things left inside the town, and most of that hinged on a couple of data packs and us updating to 1.20.4. So now that we're here, I do have the opportunity to do that. But I've just been in this, I guess, a zone. Like I'm doing this landscaping stuff pretty quickly in terms of like, well, I have an established process. I don't want to forget what that process is. So while I'm out here, I might as well just keep on going. And I do have a bunch of things in a book that I like to check off, and that's kind of like where I'm at. And speaking of a small thing that I did at the end of the week, just because I was really happy with checking off the West Hill River, I didn't want to just continue on and start the other river because I don't have the farms done. And so it's kind of hard to landscape the river when you don't have the buildings that are kind of on it or next to it. So one thing that I did do is very old build, the wheat mill that sits on the West Hill River. Some of the wheat fields you can see in the screenshots. It had no interior. I just forgot. I went in there one day and realized, oh, there's like nothing in here. So I just went upstairs, and I thought it was going to be trying to figure out how to make it like a livable space, but it ended up being, no, there's really not a space for any kind of bedroom or kitchen or anything. This is just a functional building. So the attic, which is the biggest space, was all storage. So it's just a matter of coming up with some new ideas to put some different blocks down. Things like putting bamboo down with signs around it. We've got the mini blocks from the Wandering Trades data pack from Vanilla Tweaks. So a mini chest, a mini brick, a mini barrel. They all kind of add to that. Like there's clutter kind of piled up in areas. And I did that, chests and composters, anything that I could to make it look like a container. My note blocks have got a crate texture on them. They still function like a note block, but they look like a wooden crate. And so I was able to kind of strew a lot of stuff around. And then the basement of the wheat mill actually has like a grinding wheel and some other functional bits that actually attach to the water wheel that's outside. They don't obviously turn like they would in, say, like a create mod or something, but it was fun to kind of add things to the floor and just go back and make sure that I've checked all the boxes and not left anything forgotten. I did discover that one of the barns outside the wheat mill is also empty, so I have to go and do that, but that won't take very long. Not a very big space.
Yeah, it's good for immersion to make sure that all of the boxes are checked with this kind of stuff. But the wheat mill interior does look like there's, where I grew up, there are a couple of like tide mills that still operated like traditionally and produced flour and stuff. And so I've been inside structures like this before, and this is pretty spot on for how cramped it feels on the inside. And the amount of like, you've got some hay bales here on the floor that are meant to be kind of like, loose grains or sawdust or something that would just kind of, coat the floor typically when you're in an environment like this. And it all feels pretty realistic from my point of view.
Yeah, I'd say the only thing that's probably not accurate and or safe is the amount of lanterns that are around. I feel like that would be a very, very much a fire hazard. But again, it's better the lantern than an open candle. Like I feel like that might be the trade-off there. But it was also lit back when the lighting requirements were 7 and above. So there's more light than needed in there. But I didn't really want to mess things around because it's one of those builds where sometimes it doesn't really have a center. So having 2 lanterns in an even wide room makes more sense than having one, even though one might look more ambient. It feels odd sometimes to have it off center. So I just did it in that way. But that's it for me. It's been a pretty basic week. What have you been up to in Minecraft?
I mean, my stuff has been pretty basic as well, but that's mainly because I'm just digging out a large hole. There's no real getting around it at this point. I do have to do it. And so the hole digging escapades have really continued on Minecraft SOS. Complicating that slightly is a recent challenge. We finished our latest challenge, which was to upgrade the spawn area and build shops and resources for people there. I built the Nether Hub, as we heard on the last episode of the podcast, and the new challenge after that one ended was a twofold challenge, really. The first part is to keep a server mate alive for 2 weeks, which I've already failed, as it turns out, but I was tasked with keeping LD Shadow Lady alive, and I asked her, after having revived her in a previous week, to come and help digging out my area as like a thank you, basically, as a kind of a reward for rescuing her. And so she started digging out a chunk of the giant area that I'm digging out chunk by chunk. I picked a really safe one for her to do, but she flew in too enthusiastically with elytra at one point and crashed. And so, yeah, we ended up having to revive her again. And that means that I don't get an additional fate coin at the end of this challenge. In the meantime, it is somebody else's job to take care of me. It wasn't like a buddy system where everybody pairs up. It was much more like you just get assigned a person at random, and that person is looking after somebody else, and it just kind of all loops back around in a chain. So I think it's actually Mogswamp is looking after me now, but fortunately I'm a little bit more careful as I do this digging, even though there are dripstone caves and stuff underneath here. I'm being fairly straightforward and careful with the whole process. The only thing that is going to be slightly dangerous that I need to do is the second half of our latest challenge, which requires us to complete a specific task. These were all written up on books beforehand and distributed randomly, and mine is to get the advancement for bringing a strider back to the overworld and riding it 50 blocks across a lava lake. And I've done that before, and it should be fairly straightforward. I have fire resistance potions, so I'm fairly certain I shouldn't end up dying as a result. But it's it's one of those things that, having not done it for a while, I'm trying to think, how can I make this more interesting? Do I go out and find the lava lake in the natural world? Do I create one at the bottom of one of the larger sections of this hole that I've been digging out? How am I going to tackle that? And so I'm trying to come up with interesting ways of throwing an additional twist on the challenge. Outside of that, there's not really a whole lot to speak about with my Minecraft output. It has really just been tucking away all of the resources from this and continuing to dig areas out. But I think I'm close to 50% done on this now. So once the remainder is done, I'm also accelerating because I've got beacons, swift sneak, the moss mining is going really well, and a lot of the stuff that's still left to do is going to be the chunks that are around the outside, which aren't full 16 by 16 areas because of the curvature of the circle. So hopefully I'm getting there, and I should be able to start explaining the rest of the project to people who are still confused about what's going on.
What are you doing as a solution for all of the stuff that you're mining out? Like, is it just brute force chests upon chests stacked in the corner somewhere where you're storing it all?
Yes. Yeah, there are a couple of holes in a nearby hillside that I keep returning to drop stuff off. We have access to shulker boxes now, so I'm at least bringing 2 or 3 boxes each time, so I have to make fewer trips back to the storage system, but I'm still not 100% confident how much resource I need to save for rebuilding the terrain. I've definitely got more than enough stone, I think, but with deep slate and tuff and a few other resources like that, I'm still collecting odds and ends of that as I moss mine through the deep slate layers, and I'm still collecting all the ore blocks. So those have to go somewhere, and I do just have, I don't know how many chests it is at this point, but I have a ton, like rows upon rows of double chests all back to back, and they're all just sat there with a ton of gravel, stone, all of the decorative stone types, all of that stuff is all just stashed away. I'm letting anybody who comes to help dig out a chunk take whatever materials they want to, and they can leave behind anything that they want to just shove in a chest. Some of them are just letting the natural blocks despawn and focusing on the ores, but some people have taken building material for their own purposes and just left me whatever was left behind. So there's certainly a lot of that around, but it's getting there. And I think Mog is coming to help me dig out another chunk at some point this week, so hopefully I should be able to get a few more people in to help as well.
Nice. Yeah, I when I first did my big dig under the swamp, probably just because I wanted the project, I added a bulk storage system, so I didn't have to return to the surface and manually put the blocks away. I just had to walk over to, I think, a chest and a water column where I could just dump out of my inventory right into the water. Didn't even have to interact with a chest, I don't think, at some point. I just started dumping stacks upon stacks into this system. And then it would go up into a water loop and just eventually get filtered into the different chests, so it wouldn't despawn. And I found that really convenient. But I guess if you've got people that are helping out and taking certain blocks, then like trying to explain to people every time how to use the storage system and all that kind of stuff would just be easier. Just like, look, here's where I keep everything. Put stuff you don't want in there that you feel like leaving me, and then take the stuff that you want and move on. So I imagine that shulker boxes would really help. Are you at a level on the server, like as a group, where you've got a shulker farm or shulker boxes for sale in any place?
I don't think we've got a farm set up anywhere unless somebody has done that this week. We have been out to the end and we still have the data pack that gives guaranteed shulker drops and double shells. So
Nice.
I'm pretty comfortable in terms of that amount right now. I think I've probably got room for another 20 or so. So I could fill a chest with shulker boxes at this point. But even that, like that's just for compacting the storage, which isn't really a concern. It's more about whether or not I need to move it around later. And it's stored in such large quantities that if I want a shulker box of stone, it's pretty easy to just pull an entire inventory's worth out of stone out of a nearby chest and then just shovel that into a shulker box rather than having it stored that way for convenience. But I think if I had shulker loaders and everything, like I could set up an automated storage system like that, but I've not planned for that ahead of time, and I'm already so committed to just having tons and tons of chests everywhere that I'm just going with that until I have anything else to do with it.
Well, I think there's value in that too, with the audience that you have probably bleeding over from the survival guide and people that are either new to Minecraft or not super technically minded. And even if they see a cool shulker box loader, it might not be something that's up their wheelhouse. And so playing the game the way that I would say a lot of people play the game, which is just finding chests and putting chests in walls and being organized enough for the project, is probably a good way to step forward and say, like, look, like if I'm doing it this way, this is how I would do it this way, and plan this project. And sometimes you can get hung up on the infrastructure of things, and it ends up slowing the progress on the main thing that you want to progress on, and especially on a server where there is potential hardcore consequences. I think the approach that you're taking is probably the better one.
Yeah, I mean, I've also been inspired in part by some folks in our community. Stora AS dug out a perimeter by hand and did a lot of moss mining to do that. And that's a much larger area. If you think about a proper spawn-proof perimeter has to be more than 128 blocks, in every direction. So you've got to leave some headroom in that as well if you want to farm mobs and whatnot in there. So yeah, there's definitely some people out there who do mining sort of the old-fashioned way like this, and I think it's a really fun project to do, and a lot of people have been getting behind it, despite the fact that whenever I do my streams, I'm just digging stone constantly. I am getting a chance to do something else today, though, because later today I've been invited to check out the April Fool's Snapshot with Ulraf, Bruno Danui, and I think IBX Toy Cat is joining us as well, so there are a few other creators getting involved. This was with Etho last year and Cubfan the year before as well, so we've had basically a 3-year streak now of streaming the April Fool's Snapshot. So speaking of which, we should get into the news with the Poisonous Potato update having been released today on Minecraft.net as the traditional Minecraft April Fool's Snapshot. Is now available on Java Edition through the Minecraft launcher, and I believe for Bedrock Edition players, there is an add-on that sort of simulates a lot of the stuff that they're doing with the potato update in this case. We're going to let you folks experience some of the surprises yourself, but the article is linked in our show notes along with the Poisonous Potato update video from youtube.com/Minecraft. The article introduces a poisonous potato dimension with 5 new biomes, potato-themed mobs, and even new equipment themed around the formerly useless tuber. I'm also trying to go in as unspoiled as possible, so I'm going to leave the newsread for that one there, but hopefully people will have fun checking out the snapshot, and these snapshots do stay in the launcher after April 1st, so if you're not able to pick it up, if you listen to this the day after and you think, dang it, I missed that, don't worry, you should be able to go back in the Java launcher and find it. In the meantime, on March 27th, 2024, we had an article introducing the Mace, which we already knew about, and ominous events, which we didn't. This article recaps recent additions in 1.21 experimental features and introduces the concept of ominous events. To quote the article, there's a new weapon with its components and enchantments, a new trial chamber challenge, the final 1.21 feature, exclusive to snapshots for now, plus new armor trims, banner patterns, and pottery sherds. You might already be familiar with Bad Omen, but in this update, it's being expanded to give access to an optional experience in trial chambers. All the optional experiences triggered by Bad Omen are now known as ominous events, and they're catered to bold players who want more punishing but also more rewarding adventures in Minecraft. To gain Bad Omen, you must drink the contents of an ominous bottle, a new item coming as part of the 1.21 update that can be dropped by a defeated raid captain or found in a trial chamber vault. You will no longer automatically gain the Bad Omen status effect when defeating a raid captain, so drinking the contents of an ominous bottle is the only way to get it. So the article goes on to explain that existing pillager raids are now classified as ominous events, along with the new ominous trials, a second tier of trial chamber challenge. That's also explained in the Snapshot changelog this week. So without further ado, Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 24W13A was published on March 27th, 2024, and experimental features include some changes to the mace. They've added a new explosive particle effect when executing a smash attack with the mace to really show the player's power. They've increased the power and range of the knockback effect from the smash attack, and introduced an even stronger knockback when falling for more than 5 blocks before attacking. When successfully striking a target, all vertical momentum for the player is reset in addition to negating any accumulated fall distance. The baseline additional damage dealt by the mace smash attack has been slightly reduced to 3 or 1.5 hearts per fallen block. The existing enchantment Mending, Unbreaking, Smite, Bane of Arthropods, Fire Aspect, and Curse of Vanishing can also now be applied to the mace, along with 3 new enchantments that have been introduced, unique to the mace itself. The first is Density, a common enchantment accessible from the enchanting table and on enchanted books in loot, has 5 different levels, and maces enchanted with Density do more damage per fallen block per density level. Damage dealt per fallen block is increased by 1 point per level of density, so the maximum damage the mace can do is 4 hearts or 8 points of damage per fallen block. The second enchantment is Breach, a rare enchantment accessible in the enchanting table and on enchanted books in loot. There are 4 levels of Breach, and maces enchanted with this one reduce the effectiveness of armor on the target, the effectiveness of armor being reduced by 15% per Breach level. Finally, the third enchantment is Windburst. This is a unique enchantment which can only be found in Ominous Vaults. There are 3 levels of it, and maces enchanted with Windburst will emit a Windburst upon hitting an enemy, launching the attacker upward and enabling the linking of smash attacks one after the other, a kind of pogo stick effect, and each level of Windburst will bounce the attacker higher up in the air. There are also some tweaks to the breeze and wind charges. The breeze now avoids jumping into dangerous blocks or air, and wind charges will no longer collide with end crystals. To summarize some stuff about ominous events, Bad Omen has been expanded to give an access to an optional experience in trial chambers. These optional experiences are known as ominous events. They are more challenging than usual and designed to shake up the experience in unique ways. Illager raids are an example of an existing ominous event. So Bad Omen is getting some changes with this redesign. It has a new shadowy icon and sound for being applied to the player, and it no longer triggers a raid directly when entering a village. Instead, it will transform into Raid Omen variant with a duration of 30 seconds. Once the Raid Omen expires, a raid will start at the location the player gained the Raid Omen. Like any other effect, players can drink a bucket of milk to clear the Raid Omen and prevent the raid from starting. It is no longer given to players that defeat a raid captain outside of a raid. Instead, players gain access to Bad Omen by consuming a new ominous bottle. These are items that can be consumed by players to receive the Bad Omen effect for the same duration as previously, 1 hour and 40 minutes, or 100 minutes total. They come in 5 variations, 1 for each Bad Omen level. The bottle breaks when consumed, but they can be stacked to 64 within their individual levels. So a Bad Omen 5 is not going to stack with a Bad Omen 1, but you can have up to 64 Bad Omen 1 ominous bottles in your inventory. They can be found uncommonly in any vaults that are unlocked with trial keys, and they are dropped by raid captains when defeated outside of a raid. Ominous Trials are a new ominous event that can be accessed by exploring a trial chamber with Bad Omen. This event will have players facing more powerful trial spawners, if they dare. Trial Omen is a variant that Bad Omen can transform into that occurs when the player is within detection range of a trial spawner that was not previously ominous. The Trial Omen has a duration of 15 minutes, multiplied by the transformed Bad Omen's level. Players that have Trial Omen are surrounded by ominous particles, and they activate these ominous trial spawners, a more powerful phase of the trial spawner with unique challenges and rewards. These provide a more challenging experience that advanced players can opt into for better rewards. If a trial spawner detects a player that has Trial Omen, the spawner becomes ominous as long as it is not in cooldown, or if it was in cooldown but was not ominous during its last activation, meaning you can run through an entire trial chamber, activate all of the spawners, and then go back through with Raid Omen or Trial Omen and run the entire situation again with this ominous effect in play. Making it ominous that way bypasses the cooldown from previous spawners. While active, the ominous trial spawners will glow blue instead of orange, emit soul flames instead of normal flames, and spawn mobs with equipment, if they can wear it. The equipment these mobs wear has armor trims applied from the trial chambers. There's a known issue currently that these mobs currently drop their equipment on death, but they will not do so in future, so you won't be able to farm diamond helmets from them or anything. Periodically, the trial spawns potions and projectiles on top of unsuspecting players and mobs. Based on their location, spawners in an area will select a random set of projectiles to spawn. These always include a single type of lingering potion from a set of possible effects. Becoming ominous will despawn any existing mobs that the spawner had already created and reset the challenge. It will also stay ominous until it's been defeated until the cooldown has finished. When defeated, it will eject a different set of loot to normal trial spawners. We'll cover that in a second. One of the things it gives you is the Ominous Trial Key, which is a new variant of the Trial Key that can only be obtained by defeating an Ominous Trial spawner. These can be used to unlock Ominous Vaults. These now appear throughout the Trial Chambers in harder-to-find places and require an Ominous Trial Key to unlock. They hold a more valuable set of rewards than standard vaults unlocked by Trial Keys. They also have a slightly different texture and emit soul flames instead of normal flames, so they'll be easy to distinguish from the other vaults when you see them.
New mob effects in 24W13A. The following effects have been added. Wind Charged. Affected entities will emit a wind burst upon death, brewed with an awkward potion and a breeze rod. Weaving. Affected entities will spread cobweb blocks upon death. Non-player entities with this effect can walk through cobwebs at normal speeds. Brewed with an awkward potion and a cobweb. Oozing. Affected entities will spawn into 2 slimes upon death, brewed with an awkward potion and a slime block. Infested. Affected entities have a 5% chance to spawn 1 to 2 silverfish when hurt, brewed with an awkward potion and a stone block. These effects can be encountered while taking on an ominous trial spawner. Some mobs are immune to these effects. Slimes are immune to oozing, silverfish are immune to infested. Trial spawner loot has been updated. The loot found within the trial chamber vault has been adjusted. Standard vaults will give slightly fewer items of higher quality, but also include the following changes. Ominous bottles 1 to 2 can be found. Flow banner pattern and flow armor trim smithing templates and heavy core can no longer be obtained. Guster banner pattern and bolt armor trim smithing template remain exclusive to standard vaults. In heavy core's place, standard vaults will instead have a very rare chance of providing a trident. Ominous vaults can provide some particularly valuable items, including ominous bottles levels 3 through 5, enchanted golden apples, flow banner pattern and flow armor trim smithing templates, wind burst, breach and density enchantments for the mace, and the heavy core. The loot ejected from trial spawners have been adjusted. It now has a focus on providing higher quality food for more often to make replenishing between fights more safe. Ominous trial keys have a 30% chance of ejecting from a defeated ominous trial spawner, replacing the usual 50% of the trial keys. Trial spawner tweaks. All spawners now increase the amount of mobs present at once by 0.5 for each additional player, down from 2. Baby zombie spawners now have 2 mobs present at once for its baseline, down from 3, and they can now only activate within a player's line of sight. Trial chamber tweaks. The remade Chamber 5 with variations and renamed it to Eruption, reduced amount of trial spawner in corridors, updated layouts and placements of vaults, placed ominous vaults in chambers, intersections, and at the end of corridors. Corridors will no longer generate endlessly, added an atrium to the corridors, and made various layout changes in intersections and corridors. Other changes in 24W13A, there is a unique sound for cobwebs. Technical changes in 2413A, the data pack version is now 37, the resource pack version is now 31. Both bring changes to support the features added with Ominous Trials. The data pack changes also include additions and tweaks to the item component system. Full details and the list of bug fixes can be found in the Minecraft.net article changelog linked in our show notes. This newsread is long enough already.
It really is. I found myself copy-pasting some of the stuff from the Minecraft.net changelog into the show notes this week, and suddenly it was another 6 or 7 pages long. So we had to split that up between the two of us. But hopefully people are okay sitting through all of that, and there are really some very exciting changes to trial chambers. So I hopped into a Snapshot world on stream yesterday and spent a few hours poking around trial chambers in survival. And as a side note, before we get into this, I will say it's a great idea giving cartographers a trial chamber map. I actually lucked into my first trial chamber as I was just exploring and getting geared up for the first time. I just spotted one in a nearby cave. But after that, I went looking for a village, and it took me a while to find one. But as soon as I did, I got a cartographer leveled up to journeyman relatively easily. They had a trial chamber map available. I just had to go and grab the material for a compass. And then the second trial chamber was really close by. It was literally in the same map as the village. Very easy to find from that point onwards. I just dug straight down and found it right away. So I think, honestly, including villagers in the gameplay loop of locating trial chambers is a very smart move. And the cartographer getting a new lease of life that way, I think, is a really good change.
I agree. From no first-hand experience, but hearing from you and watching a couple of videos online of how difficult it was for people to find the trial chambers to test these new features in survival, cartographers getting the trial chamber maps is a solid change, especially on top of the changes they made last week or the week before, where trial chambers are farther apart and more rare. So I think that in one way, that's going to make them fun to discover, because you're not going to be digging into the side of one quite as often on your own, unled by a map. But if you are specifically seeking one out, like if you're gunning for that mace or you're gunning for one of these new experiences in the trial chamber, then you know how to do it. You go to a village, you find a cartographer, and they'll point you to the nearest, not near, but nearest trial chamber if there is one. And it reminds me of the kind of things like maps to woodland mansions and that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So I think having had a bit more experience of trial spawners and trial chambers now, the ominous trials are a fun variant. It kind of reminds me of the scaling level of difficulty you had in Minecraft dungeons. Before you went in, you would choose, this is how, difficult or easy I want the level to be. So you can kind of do that once you built up a few of these ominous potions, right? You can get to the point where you choose what level of raid omen you want, and that's how long it will last for, and then you can run through the entire place spawning these ominous trial mobs instead of the regular trial mobs, and you can sort of choose beforehand whether you want to do that, or you can do it organically as the bottles pop up from the regular vaults. So there's a lot of player agency in this in terms of the level of challenge, which I think is really fun. It even feels Minecraft Dungeons-y when you get potions and projectiles popping out of the woodwork and suddenly dropping on you. And the side effect of that is that you want to be constantly on the move, because otherwise if you stand still for too long, you can't just back yourself into a corner and stay there because a potion spawns above your head and suddenly you've got weakness, or suddenly like a poison arrow generates above you and hits you. So there's a bit of tactical change up that happens when you're dealing with ominous trials that isn't necessarily there for the regular trials, and I think that's really solid. Like, so far it feels like quite a fun experience.
And good that it's an option, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not built into default. Like, you have to drink the what's it called? Potion?
Ominous potion. Yeah.
Ominous potion to create the ominous effect. And it's the kind of mechanic that we've seen in Minecraft more lately, where this is a thing where this ominous event, well, that's ambiguous enough. You could put an ominous event in the nether down the line, in the end down the line. So it adds potential more gameplay expanding on an existing system if they so choose. And I think that's really smart in terms of the players that want that kind of challenge. It's great. And for the players that don't want that kind of challenge, it's not forced upon them. It's not, let's make the trial chamber super hard. Let's make the trial chamber super hard if you want, which I think is great.
Yeah. And it also now gives you not just one, but two safety nets for accidentally starting a raid, which I think is really good. Like, first of all, you have to opt in to getting Bad Omen now in a way that you didn't before. So, like, if you were fighting a pillager patrol but you had villagers around, you were really stuck for what to do about the captain with the banner. And now you will just be guaranteed a drop of an ominous bottle from them, and you don't need to worry about it because you're not going to drink that right away if you're still around your villager training hall, right? But then if you do want to do that, or if you do that by accident, if you're exploring, you happen to have Bad Omen and you wander into a village, you just run up to the village's cows, drink a bucket of milk, and you get rid of Raid Omen before the raid starts. That cancels the event happening. So I think there have been a couple of occasions in the past in which a raid has started at somebody's base on a server or whatever, and it's been disastrous. I think having multiple levels of being able to avoid that now is really going to give players more agency over that, and also allow them to just take out pillager patrols, especially for newer players, without the concern of, well, what's going to happen if I kill this raid captain?
How do you feel about the loot from the trial chambers?
So this is my major point of contention with the changes that they've made lately, and it's that the loot from trial spawners feels a little bit rough now. And that's obviously the lowest level of loot that you're getting, because the point is to have those provide keys which unlock the vaults, and the vaults are going to give you the better stuff. And then now they provide a second tier of keys if you do an ominous trial, and that's the really good stuff, right? But as a result, there has been this watering down of loot from trial spawners that they feel a little bit rough now. You're getting keys most of the time. I think, yeah, they said in the changelog it's about a 50% chance to get a regular trial key, which means that anytime you get anything else, you end up feeling a little bit deflated. And because it's mostly food, right? It's stuff to keep you going in the trial chamber, especially if you've gone in with minimal equipment, which is what I was doing. It's still just like, it gives you a baked potato. It almost feels like a joke, you know? It feels a bit like a smack in the face. And I feel like maybe there's like a less than 4% chance of getting like a couple of golden carrots or an ender pearl or something like that. And I feel like those higher level food rewards should probably be brought in line with the other items, because they're still not going to be as desirable as the trial keys, but at least it feels like you're getting something that is worthwhile in there. And, you know, there's a chance of getting a handful of glowberries or something from it, which always feels a little bit too meager in terms of food that's really going to keep you going in there. So I went in with a fresh survival world the last couple of times I've done these, and I didn't spend too much time getting food from the surface, mostly because I wanted to get to the action fast, but also because I wanted to see, does the trial chamber itself provide enough resources for you to keep going? And it becomes a scramble for food. And so when you're given like a handful of glowberries, or an ominous spawner has a chance of just dropping rotten flesh, that just feels like a slap in the face for real. Like, that feels like it is very meager fare when you're looking for something that is effectively just going to unlock the next level of loot from something else. And the thing about moving all of the better rewards to ominous vaults, because that's how you get the heavy core now, is that the regular vaults don't feel super worth it to me anymore. You can still get, I think as unique rewards go, you can still get the bolt armor trim and one of the banner patterns from vaults, from the regular trial vaults. But once you've obtained those, you can use banner patterns as many times as you want to. They're not consumed. And the armor trim you can duplicate as many times as you want. So you only ever need to encounter one of each of those, at which point vaults, I think, only become worth opening for extra wind charges if you're farming those, and maybe some more ominous bottles so that you can do some ominous vaults. But then you also get the ominous bottles from pillager captains, so you might be better off just setting up a farm around a pillager outpost in order to get hold of a lot of those. Whereas when it comes to opening the ominous vaults, those have the heavy core, they have enchanted golden apples, they have the other banner pattern and armor trim that you can get from the vaults. Those feel like the ones that are going to be worth opening long term. And I basically got every reward except the heavy core from an ominous vault. I opened maybe 10 of them total over the course of the stream. And there are about 5 of them per trial chamber, depending on the size. So there's enough in there to string you along with the hope of getting the heavy core, but I don't think there is enough additional loot that feels worthwhile to really balance out the one thing that players are actually going to be there looking for, which is the ingredient for the mace. I think being able to fight breezes along the way, so you get wind charges and breeze rods to also craft the mace with, that part of it might draw some players in, especially if they like the combat challenge side of things. But the way I see this going is, in single player, players are going to restructure a trial chamber to allow them to farm ominous potions and then ominous vault keys. And then they're going to go searching other trial chambers with the ominous keys already in hand, ignore most of the challenges, and just open the ominous vaults trying to get the heavy core. That's the way I see these going. I think in multiplayer, there's a lot more scope for doing fun stuff with them, because every new player that arrives at the trial chamber is going to be able to open the vault. So if you wanted to set up your base in there and just invite people over, you can maybe sell them the experience of like, hey, you can run around the structure and like I've remodeled the inside so it's more of a challenge in some areas, or you get to stuff differently and it's a custom dungeon and you can have fun with that. Or you could set everything up so that the spawners automatically farm themselves. They generate keys for people. You sell the keys to them so that they can go and get the rewards from ominous vaults, and then it's kind of left up to the RNG whether or not they get the rewards thereafter. But I feel like there's some scope for doing cool stuff with them, but as an individual experience, it's more about the journey than the destination right now. It's more about, do you enjoy a combat challenge, and are you prepared to suffer through some subpar feeling rewards right now in order to get hold of that one desirable item?
Just so I'm clear, you didn't do the ominous event 10 times. You did the ominous event, and there were 10 ominous spawners, or ominous vaults rather, that you could then attempt to unlock. After the event, right? Yeah,
so when you have the trial omen effect, that lasts for a duration and it doesn't get consumed by you starting a trial spawner with the ominous effect. So if you walk into a room with like 10 minutes of trial omen, there are 3 or 4 spawners in that room. They all activate because you're like within line of sight and close enough range to them.
Sure.
You take care of all of those. They each have a chance to drop a key for you, and then you still walk out of there with like 5 minutes of trial omen left that you can go into the next room and keep doing that. So it feels like a fairly self-sustaining gameplay loop once you're in there, and you're getting keys from, like you said, 30% of the vaults, so you get a handful of keys. There are more than enough trial spawners in each trial chamber to give you enough keys that while you're there you can unlock all of the ominous vaults. Like that, it seems like it's pretty well balanced in terms of how many of those you get. But I think long term people are just going to want to go to other trial chambers to find the ominous vaults and probably skip everything else.
Yeah, that seems like the way to go. And I agree with all the things that you just said. The addition for me is the reverse of the point that I made earlier, which is, these ominous effects are now optional. You have to drink the ominous potion to start any of these ominous events. But instead of having a lower chance of getting the heavy core without doing an ominous event, they've removed it entirely. Which means if you're in a single player world and you want to get the heavy core, you have to engage in the ominous event in the trial chamber.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, then goes back and removes the choice. If players are excited about the mace, then they have no choice but to do the ominous event. Now, I get it. Like, it's a game, and you want that risk reward, time in versus reward out, that kind of thing. But I think just from the outside, and again, I haven't tried this myself in survival, and I've only just seen content from you and other creators about it. I don't see the appeal of doing even the regular trial chamber. If you know that the loot you're going to get is kind of subpar, there are a lot of easier ways to get a trident. That kind of stuff doesn't seem like it's up there. I like the design. I like the concept. It feels very different in terms of just a visual experience. Like it still feels like Minecraft, but it's ramped up to a level of RPG that I've not seen in Minecraft in the years that I've been playing.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it is just the design. As an artist, I love the ominous keys, like the 3-headed skull key. Very cool. Reminds me of like a Diablo, or maybe, you might be able to speak to this in terms of a D&D tabletop experience, right? They have this really interesting art style. The fact that the skulls on the vaults open their mouths for the keys
Yeah.
when you get closer. It has like a labyrinth / Disney vibe to it. Like there's all kinds of stuff that I find neat and visually appealing about the trial chambers and the whole interaction with the events. And I understand that my comments are colored by not being a big PvE person. But I think that there should be at least a little bit more balancing in the rewards, because I think one of the things that I would hope they want to do with this kind of stuff is to engage the players like me who don't particularly enjoy PvE or are intimidated by it, don't want to die. Maybe they're just not that good at the mechanics physically of doing combat in Minecraft. I find personally hand-to-hand combat in a first-person game is tricky for me. So in a way, you want to encourage those players like, well, that's not my thing, but this looks really fun.
Yeah.
Right. And part of the fun is the reward. I am victorious. I actually did it. I get the cool thing. But from what you're saying, the cool thing means that you have to do the hard mode, which is a tentative player's last resort, not encouraging first step.
Yeah, but then again, I think it's nice that you do a fairly difficult combat trial and you're rewarded for that by being given something that allows you to make a new weapon, and is the only way of getting that weapon at this point in time. So there is like a sense that it's rewarding going down that particular gameplay style's route, you know? It's like if you did enough building and they suddenly dropped a really cool block on you. I think there's some fun stuff to be had with combat in this game that wasn't there previously, and it feels like the scaling challenge feels like it'll be rewarding to players who like that kind of stuff. The trial chambers themselves are also now really polished feeling. Like, there aren't too many intersections that feel kind of wonky. It's clear how all of the different chambers fit together, so when you're exploring them, you have a sort of natural feeling of getting around the place. Once you've seen a few of them, you understand how the layout is. But the atrium that they've added into the corridor looks really nice as well. There are murals on either wall. There's one that's a spider and one that was like a spiral kind of pattern evoking the breeze and the new tough block texture. So there's some really cool like iconography included in these that kind of really makes them feel like part of Minecraft now, you know? And I think the way a lot of the chambers have been refined and fit together, it speaks to the level of iteration that they've had and working with player feedback and a bit more play testing. I think they've come up with some really, really cool designs for these now. So I'm looking forward to seeing if this is like the final iteration on those, or if they get a few more variations before we sort of wrap up development on 1.21 and the update releases. But it's also a series of chambers that they could add more to in future if they decide that there are additional challenges they want to bring to them. So as a feature, it feels very polished at this stage. I think the loot still needs a bit of tweaking. I think the trial of the ominous trials side of things maybe wants a bit of tweaking, for better or for worse, for more difficult or less difficult for players. But I think all in all, it still feels like a very rich experience if you're willing to engage with it. But for now, we're going to move on into chunk mail. We're going to return to Trial Chambers a little bit in our main discussion. But first of all, we'd like to encourage you to email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com, because episode 300 is fast approaching. We are less than 10 episodes away now. And for that episode, to mark the milestone, we are planning an all Q&A episode. So if you would like to write in with a one-sentence question about anything you would like to ask us, whether it's about Minecraft, about making podcasts, other video games we like to play, our inspirations, other experiences, and so forth. Keep them fun, obviously, but we would like to include as many members of the community as possible. So once again, email spawnchunkmail@gmail.com and add 300 Q&A to the subject line of your email so that they can be easily organized for that show. We would love to hear from you.
Our first email comes in from Bundy Guy, Enchanted Table Ideas. Hello, Jonny and Joel. I was listening to the enchanting table discussion on episode 287 about all the different ways Mojang could make enchanting tables more viable. I really enjoyed the discussion, and it gave me an idea of my own. What if, when using the enchantment table, it had an option to slot an enchanted book into it? This would queue up the same enchanted book, the price in the enchanting table. It would mean you would only need to randomly hunt for enchantments one time, and then you would be able to use it to queue up the same enchantment whenever you want, as long as the enchantment table was sufficiently buffed by bookshelves. This idea is similar to copying banners. You still have the random hunt for the enchantment at first, but once you had the item, it would be guaranteed. For multi-level enchantments, you could purchase lower level enchantments to combine together to give the max enchantment to use as your quote-unquote template and make it less random. Bundy Guy did not die because his armor was fully enchanted with protection. I like this idea of building up a codex of enchanted books and then using them as a template in the way that other profession blocks work in the game already. Improving enchanting tables. Early game enchanting would still work the same. You wouldn't have access to an enchanted book, so it would still be RNG. You'd still be doing levels in lapis. And as the player gets more advanced, cued by the silhouette of an enchanted book in the enchantment table interface, or maybe an advancement hint or something to point the player in that direction, they move from the RNG to a more predictable outcome. To balance this, there could be a different way or a different cost to combine enchanted books. The idea reminds me of how armor templates work in the smithing table. Search for them in the world, then through some expense, craft duplicates to apply to your armor.
Yeah. I think it's a solid foundation for a mechanic. And the Bibliocraft mod, to my recollection, used to have a book press which did something similar. It allowed you to make copies of enchanted books, and that was balanced by having to craft specific printing plates for enchanted books, and those would break after multiple uses. So there was a separate workstation for it, but the base idea there was the same. So I think it's a neat idea for the enchantment table to have more uses later in the game when you've got all of the, mending and whatnot enchantments that you care to have, but you still need to generate enchanted books for one-off cases. Like if you need an unbreaking book for something, it can be so painful going through the enchanting table for just unbreaking when you've got like piercing and trident enchantments and a bunch of other stuff coming up when all you want is one enchantment. And I really think that's why librarian trades with villagers are kind of in the game, and I think it's nice to move those sorts of trades back into the player's hands and give you a few more flexible options when it comes to that, but I'm not certain this is quite the right solution for it. The thing is, whenever we're moving mechanics like this around, we're also moving them away from stuff like the anvil when it comes to getting books and combining things and enchanting stuff that way. And I don't know if the anvil sort of starts to feel a little bit more redundant after a certain point. If you're using the multi-level enchantments, you can combine those in an anvil, sure, but then if you're just generating efficiency 5 books straight from the enchantment table after a certain point, then the anvil is no longer going to be used to combine efficiency 4, and the same goes for any other multi-level enchantments that you could add secondary tiers to. Not only that, but you end up with books that can have unbreaking, mending, efficiency. You can add all of those books together, but then if you're duplicating that in the enchanting table, do you just offset that with level cost? At a certain point, level cost doesn't mean anything to a player once you have a decent enough XP farm. So I think there's a risk in making that kind of stuff a little bit too unbalanced by allowing players to just straight up copy stuff later.
There's no way to copy an enchanted book, right? You just have to go get another one. You can combine 2 books together to create a new enchantment, like Unbreaking 2 and 2 to create Unbreaking 3.
Yeah.
But you can't just copy a book. Like, I'm just thinking that I've got the armor templates in my head in terms of like, there's an armor template, there's a piece of material like say mossy cobble, and then there's diamonds, and that's how you duplicate the templates, right? So I'm just thinking about the same sort of idea, but with like lapis instead of diamonds for books. And then I don't know what the other, I guess you'd have like, a blank book and then one of your enchantment books, but then that feels too easy too.
Yeah.
Like it's I'm trying to think of a way that would add something to this, but like you said, without taking away the mechanic from like trading with a librarian. And at least to Bundy Guy's point, I like that the idea of changing the enchantment table would be something where you would still first have to engage in that new villager mechanic, if they add it, of walking around into the different biomes and getting the different books from different places. And then once you've done that, you can come back, and then you no longer have to do that every time. Like you can continue and enchant in one spot. But I don't know how you make it a little bit more appealing or remove some of the RNG from it without, as you said, removing it from the villager thing. I'm wondering if maybe the solution isn't to take the books from the villagers to the enchantment table. Maybe the solution is taking the enchantment table to the villagers. Like maybe the enchantment table needs to be a workstation for a new villager. I don't know.
Maybe, but then, yeah, it's difficult to understand how you get a villager to be an enchanter, but that's somehow not the librarian villager, and it's sort of it's difficult to imagine reworks of these systems that don't sort of eclipse another mechanic that's already in the game. Mm-hmm. And my other thought for this would be, would a duplication mechanic like this allow you to dupe treasure enchantments like Swift Sneak, which is currently only available from ancient cities? You can get plenty of soul speed books from Piglin bartering, but that's still the only source of those. And Frostwalker and Mending are also treasure enchantments that are only villagers, dungeons, or fishing. And so being able to get those natively from the enchantment table just when you've acquired one of those books initially feels a little bit cheap for what those mechanics are supposed to be. Like, imagine it like armor templates, where on a multiplayer server, once one player has access to a Swift Sneak book, they can duplicate it infinitely for the other players on the server. Nobody ever needs to go looking for it in an ancient city again. It just, again, eclipses the go to an ancient city and risk that in order to get this valuable enchantment. It just completely disposes of that, which could be a good thing for some players, but then that's why you have that one friend who's always up for going to an ancient city, because then they can go and do the challenges and get the stuff instead of you having to go and do it yourself. But it still feels like it cheapens that and turns it into something you can just do in your own home, you know?
Yeah. I wonder if instead of buffing the I guess chance. I mean, this is the whole point of Bundy Guy's email, but I'm just thinking, like, if there was a way to increase the power of the enchantment table so that when you finally do get the enchantment that you want, then maybe you can enchant more than one thing.
Maybe
as a one-off. So like you've got your pickaxe. How often do you need to get, you know, your pickaxe enchanted? You probably only need to get one or two of them, right? And if you've got eventually get mending through the traditional means of getting mending, you like say mending isn't available on the enchantment table, and you just, you know, you go and you get it through your librarian. But if you had a way to somehow put an enchantment book or enchanted book in the enchanting table, and then it allows you to chant two pickaxes at once instead of one, maybe? I don't know. I'm just thinking about a way to say, all right, well, yes, I had to deal with the RNG, but I have to deal with it less often. Maybe is one way to possibly solve it. So try not to take anything away from the other mechanics, but giving a little bit less, I don't want to say pain, but pain in the butt, you know, to the people dealing with the enchantment table, I guess.
Yeah, I think the thing is, because we're having these discussions so frequently about how we can obtain enchantments, it's fairly clear that enchantment and repairs and combining stuff could do with a rework at some stage, but I feel like a lot of the solutions people are suggesting are so focused on player convenience that sort of they neglect the aspect of player enjoyment through gameplay. You know, like it's much more about getting this stuff out of the way so we can get on to the next thing. And I feel like acquiring the enchantments in the first place is gameplay. And so I
Right.
feel like that's the part that I think people are sometimes missing. It's sort of invisible gameplay to people at this point.
Yeah, if you go back and you watch the old Etho episodes and how excited he is about like what's going to happen with the enchantment table this time around, that I finally have 30 levels to mess with this. Like, I mean, you can see that part of the gameplay was thoroughly enjoyed, right?
Yeah, sure. Anyway, let's move on to Lezu God's email. This one is a slightly different but equally mystical subject affecting the beacon. Howdy, Joel and Pix. 4 potions with new effects have been added to Minecraft in the decades since beacons were first introduced, and the recent Snapshot has added even more. Plus, lingering potions and tipped arrows now compete with beacons in offering long-range and area effects. Do you think it's time for Mojang to add more effect options for beacons, or even change them to broadcast any potion the player can obtain? I definitely think an invisibility, slow-falling, or wind-charged beacon would open up some new opportunities. LaserGod died from a dedicated potion of harming beacon.
I don't know if all potions are suitable for a beacon's broadcast. I do like the idea of a beacon broadcasting, though. It's very old school TV, like UHF idea for me. However, there would be some fun and interesting, usefully additions, I think. Like slow falling beacon could make for some weird and fun mini games. Strength beacon could help players that have more trouble than others fighting mobs in survival or create a unique challenge in PvP arenas. Fire resistance would be my top priority. Building in the Nether, taking on a build around lava, or working on a farm or project in Nether Fortress where there's a lot of blaze around. A fire resistance beacon would be welcome for me instead of drinking potions. Although that bounces back to our discussion a few minutes ago about taking away, something instead of providing a new gameplay thing for people to do, which is get, fire resist potions that you have to bring with you and drink every 8 minutes in order to, maintain that effect. I wonder though, would we just want more beacon effects, quote unquote, or would we want something new? Really good example of this is the conduit, which was added and gave water breathing, night vision, and haste, rather than just adding those effects to a beacon that players would just place underwater. So my question, bouncing off of the Nether idea for fire resistance, what would a Nether specific beacon-like structure look like? So instead of just adding something to beacons, possibly taking away something from a fire resistant potion, what would it look like in the Nether? Would it be like an upside down pyramid? Would there be some sort of key power component that's new? Would it be netherite related? Would it be similar to what LaserGod suggested, which is instead of walking up to a beacon with an iron ingot, for example, or any of the other minerals, for the Nether beacon, air quotes, would you have to then brew the potions first anyway? But then could you automate that? Could it, could you load it up with 4 or 5 potions that still have to be brewed, but then you don't have to carry them around with you, and then every time it runs out it would just regenerate, or it would give you a total of like 36 minutes or something. There's some ideas there where I think it's a neat concept that could be a new thing added to the game that players then have to go put time in, challenge, reward, rather than just like, we all know how to get a beacon. Like adding a slot to a beacon to me is less interesting than something like they did with 113 with the conduit.
Yeah, I like the idea of adding new multi-block structures like the beacon and the conduit. So the idea of a Nether specific beacon type thing seems like a fun idea. And this is entirely coincidental, I think, but it turns out that the base and beacon block fit perfectly in the top half of a desert pyramid, where you have that chamber at the top that doesn't really contain anything. Like, you can build a beacon in there and it fits the exact dimensions of that space. And so now I'm thinking of if there are any Nether structures, like if there's a point in the Nether Fortress that looks like something could go there. And I don't really think there is, but it's kind of a neat idea, I feel like. And yeah, I sort of wonder, I mean, if we're just retooling the beacon, like if we're just throwing in a couple of extra status effects that are only on potions right now, I think it'd be fun to have effects which impact mobs rather than players. And I think that might make mob farms a bit too easy in the case of stuff like harming or poison. But then you've got things like weakness, slowness, maybe glowing even, so that it permanently illuminated the mobs that stepped within the beacon's radius. I think that could be kind of fun. It'd be really neat for testing mob farms out and seeing whether or not anything was actually spawning inside your dark room. That'd be kind of neat. Maybe stuff like blindness as well, potentially, has room for like being able to sneak around mobs if their vision is temporarily impaired. And I think there's a few things like that would work, where things like harming or regen or anything like that might feel a little bit too powerful against certain types of mobs. But I don't know if we just want more beacon effects, because it feels fairly neat the way it is. As far as I'm aware, haste is the only effect that can't already be obtained through a potion. Resistance can, but it has the drawback of being with slowness in the Turtle Master potion. But I think everything else is still just a potion that you can drink. So I would sort of like it to be a unique effect to give the beacon more value than for it to be an existing potion effect that we can already acquire through other means.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, we can move on to our main discussion this week, which I wanted to start with a recap of 1.21's major features, because as of the snapshot changelog we received this week, Minecraft 1.21 is, as far as we can tell, not going to be receiving any more major additions. So we can run through a quick changelog here posted on the Minecraft wiki for Java Edition 1.21. This will cover Bedrock Edition as well, but obviously without all of the additional tweaks and whatnot that come with each of these releases. So the main things are the Crafter, a redstone-powered block which introduces auto-crafting. We have copper grates, copper doors and trapdoors, chiseled copper, and the copper bulb. There are tough stairs, slabs, and walls, along with polished tough and tough bricks, each with stairs, slabs, and walls, and a separate chiseled tough block. Trial chambers, which have trial spawners, vaults, and ominous variants of both. Trial keys to unlock vaults, and ominous trial keys to unlock ominous vaults. There are 2 new armor trims, 2 new banner patterns, 3 new pottery sherds, and of course the new cartographer map to locate trial chambers. There are 2 new mobs, which are the Bogged and the Breeze. Wind charges and breeze rods have been added. Wind charges allowing for traversal. The breeze rod is used to craft the mace. And a new weapon, the mace, crafted with a new heavy core block. There are 3 new enchantments unique to the mace, which we've heard about. And as of this latest snapshot, 4 new brewable potions and effects, which are oozing, weaving, wind charged, and infested. We've also seen a rework of Bad Omen and 7 new advancements. There might still be a couple of tweaks coming in the next few weeks, because sometimes music gets added for a new update. There might be a new music disc or something along those lines, and those are usually left to the last couple of snapshots before the main release. But this seems to line up with the previous year's development cycle, where the final major features for Minecraft 1.20 were added on March 22nd in the snapshot that was released then. So at this stage, we can assume that they're making good on that promise, and that 1.21 is at least in terms of major features, looking like this is the update. So Joel, what out of this list of features stands out the most to you as something you're looking forward to getting into in 1.21?
For me, it's the Crafter. It's on the top of my list. And in a way, it could be because I've been almost exclusively building, doing very little redstone for the last 3 years with West Hill. But I'm really looking forward to revamping old farms on the server, redesigning some new systems for my own future projects, changing storage required for farms, because you won't need nearly as much stuff anymore, as you can condense some things like bone blocks and different things down. And I'm really intrigued by the idea of balancing input and output on redstone farms, rather than the current popular brute force, make as much as you can, you'll never need more again strategy, which is still fine, because that's a cool, fun challenge. Like, ultimate items per hour, that kind of stuff is great. But I just like the idea of like, I'm going to make a dye farm and I need bone meal for that dye farm. So I'm going to make like a renewable kelp or bone meal farm that's nearby, or not bone meal farm, a bamboo farm that could be made into bone meal. That's going to be just enough to top up that dye farm and produce the amount of dye that I need, and then maybe have it so that the thing will shut off when the dye farm is full. Like, who needs more than, a shulker box, or maybe even just like a dropper that's full of 9 stacks of dye, and maybe that's all you need, in any given moment. So I'm thinking about like, how can I have these miniature kind of manipulated situations that will help me out with that. And from what I've been learning, watching some people play with the crafter that have it either in snapshots or data packs right now, is learning more about comparators. And I feel like one of the things that I find challenging about using comparators and using containers in Minecraft is figuring out the level of fullness you have to fill a container to get the right redstone signal. Whereas crafters, it's 9 buttons and it's 9 signals. And I think that is, going to be something that will help some of the people that don't do a lot of redstone get introduced into a little bit more of it's almost like having a keypad for your comparators, whether or not you're using it as a crafter or not. And I think that's really intriguing.
Yeah, I think the user interface for the crafter is really well designed, and I think, like the observer, it's going to be one of those things that is worth learning how to use because it's going to make your life that much easier. Like, observers were the gateway to me understanding more about redstone, and so I think the crafter is going to be one of those blocks that it will be very beneficial for players to work out how to use, and that could be the gateway to more exploration of redstone mechanics from there. I think most players are just going to use it to compact resources from farms, because that's the easiest thing to do with it, really, is have it make your bone meal from skeleton farms or your bones into bone meal and then into bone blocks for easy storage, so that you can just store a bunch of stuff that way. The iron is going to be condensed down from an iron farm into iron blocks now, and that kind of thing. But then once you've figured that out, you go, hang on a minute, can I just have it make anvils for me constantly, and that kind of thing? So I think players are going to find it easy to learn and rewarding to master. I think the only unfortunate thing about the crafter is that it now feels a bit like old news, because they released it, changed the texture a couple of times, but it didn't really need a great deal of iterating on. It was a very complete feature when it was introduced, and so it feels like old news at this point, in the way that trial chambers, even though they've been announced at Minecraft Live and were in the game relatively quickly, have had so many iterations to improve upon the balance of them since then that it feels like they're still news, you know? And I feel like people are just so used to the crafter at this point, especially from having watched players mess around with it in tutorials and on the new season of Hermitcraft, that they're not necessarily going to consider the crafter as, you know, as big a deal when the update finally arrives as it is, you know, in terms of the grand scope of the game.
One of the things I think that's interesting about, I don't want to say early adoption, but like the stuff that's been around in snapshots for a while. Also, I had to remind myself that trial chambers were announced at Minecraft Live.
Yeah.
It's probably just because they've only been in snapshot experimental stuff recently, but it feels like they're more of a recent thing than all the way back in October for me. But I wonder if that's a symptom of the new way that they're organizing snapshot stuff, because we've got the minor update, but then the major update features get laced into the minor update snapshots under the experimental features tab.
Yeah.
And so they end up being around for a lot longer. And the good side of that is lots of player feedback over a longer period of time that hopefully mean a more robust and or more ironed out feature when it finally gets launched. The other side of that, of course, is what all that you just mentioned, which is things feeling not as new as they should when 1.21 finally drops.
I expect there will also be a few people listening to this going, hey, what about armadillos and wolves and wolf armor? And I'm like, no, those are for 1.20.5, and we still don't know when that's going to arrive, but I presume it's going to be released as soon as they're done tinkering with item components as a system. So, like, that's the under the hood stuff, obviously, but that seems like it's part of minor updates and is being worked on by that team as opposed to the team that's developing for 1.21. But yeah, either way, I think it's strange the fact that we get so used to these things before they're even available in the game, just because of how much people like to be immersed in the community stuff that's going on within Minecraft, and how just playing the game is only a small part of what you end up doing in terms of like following Minecraft as a phenomenon. I think the same thing is true perhaps of the expanded copper and tough block palette. I feel like that already feels a bit like old news, but I'm really excited for those. Like, I'm looking forward to introducing them into the survival guide world almost as much as I am the crafter, because it gives you more building options, it creates more uses for copper. The grates are still one of my favorite new blocks, and they can do even more since they were initially introduced. They can be waterlogged now and so forth. There's lots of little like minor things that have changed about them that I'm excited to really dive into. We were talking to Mog Swamp last week about how he was looking forward to building with Tough as an intermediary gray block in color palettes and switching up the gradient and things like that. There's some neat stuff that's going to be part of having Tough and polished Tough. Even the natural Tough getting slabs and stairs is as big a deal as stone getting slabs and stairs was in terms of landscaping. So I think that's also a really big deal.
I agree. Next on my list are the new blocks. And again, I have written down here specifically the new Tough blocks. I think what I like about this is that it feels like the darker range of blocks is getting rounded out a bit in terms of adding more contrast options to builders' palettes. So if you wanted something to contrast a lighter block like a bone or any kind of beige block or lighter block, you have stone, which is gray, but it's kind of the same tone. It's not darker. It's just a different color, different hue. But if you go into deep slate or blackstone, like it's dark,
Mm-hmm.
and it creates perhaps too much of a contrast for what you're looking for. So Tough, I think, has a wider range because there's enough teal and green in Tough that it's going to match landscaping and greenery. I've tucked it behind bushes before to great effect. I think it also has that nice way of transitioning from deep slate into cobble or deep slate into other stone choices. And then you've got the additional carving and polished variants and all that kind of stuff that comes with the new family of blocks. And I think it just opens up the variation from everything looking like a stone brick, or everything being a perfect square like andesite or smooth stone. I think there's a nice variation in there. And yes, there are bricks and Tough, but there's also the chiseled versions, and they've got some different highlights on the blocks. So I've noticed when I've seen them used in examples where you put them in the ceiling, that creates a very different feeling. You still have a dark ceiling, but you can still see the detail. If you do a dark ceiling in other stone blocks like Deep Slate, for example, the way that Minecraft lighting works, it just kind of disappears depending on how far away from you that ceiling is as a player. Like if it's up into a higher, darker ceiling, unless you've got it lit, you're not going to see the details that you've put up there. Whereas I find that the way that the texture works with the faux lighting, like it's each texture in Minecraft that's like a brick or something is sort of lit in terms of how it's painted to kind of help the effect, right? And I think that Tough blocks have a really good texture in that way. The other new block that I'm excited about, to wrap back to some redstone, is the copper bulb. Great for different lighting effects. Neat that you get to interact with it with the axe for different light levels, but then also acts as like a very simple T flip flop.
Yes.
With the way that it works. So that I think is going to be fun to play with and work within redstone contraptions as well.
I think the copper bulb has had a bad rap because of a change that happened a little while ago where they removed the single ticking behavior from it. And I think since then everybody seems to have concentrated so much on the negative aspect of that and forgotten that, this is a compact T flip-flop. This is going to make memory circuits more compact to build and things like that. There are going to be lots of little things that are going to be made slightly easier by having a block like this in the game, and it's a really cool looking light source block that's available in 4 different colors because of the aging stages of copper. So every time you think about stuff added with copper, you got to think actually there are 4 of those because of the different oxidation stages.
I think that that's something that they could possibly help in their release notes or even snapshot notes or any kind of summary thing, in that they could refer to it as like the copper family of doors or family of trapdoors, and I feel like that will help remind players rather than just copper doors, right?
Yeah.
I think if you remember, like that's the whole copper family has got like 4 of everything. And I think that that's a good thing to, I market, like, why not? Like I think, next in line with where are we going to put it all, Mojang?
Yeah.
When you're decorating with your copper doors everywhere. But I've seen some copper trapdoors used to great effect in the various different levels where players are aesthetically deciding, oh, do I want the aged copper or the oxidized? Like, what do I want here to best match with the block palette that I've already chosen. And I think it's going to be really cool to have that level of selection with more sub blocks, because I often use trapdoors as like the side of them to help like smooth out a curve or add a color or shadow or something in a place where I want it. And having the range of colors and textures that are available in the copper family is going to be interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if I just built the Nether Hub on Minecraft SOS out of a lot of copper and azalea leaves and moss blocks. And I think if I had copper grates for that, if I had a few other blocks like that, I would be using them all over the place for variation. I think there's some really cool effects that you could get out of those. So yeah, those I'm really looking forward to. Then I think what I was not expecting to happen was that trial chambers have really become the focus of this update. And I think that might be what's throwing a few people off, because in the previous updates, we've had more of a broad range of features. We've got features that sort of appeal to a lot of different players. In the Wild update and in Trails and Tales, there were new structures and new biomes and new wood types and things like that. And instead, now we've got a really strong focus on this specific structure, which adds a lot. You know, that you think about the copper and tough editions are really there to build out the block palette for the trial chambers as an experience. So I think that's worth acknowledging. But the trial chambers themselves have got so much a broader of a range of features internally from when they were announced. They focused on making those a much deeper experience, instead of just going, well, we can throw out a modified biome of some type here and there, or, you know, go back to the well of ideas just to throw in a biome to appease players who are going to want content like that. Like, maybe they're saving those ideas for the future when they really feel like they'll be relevant to whatever the theme of the update is. But I think this time around, they've really focused on what I think is effectively a huge rework of spawner dungeons without removing the old ones from the game. They've gone back to the basics of, you find a structure that has a spawner inside of it and you can maybe farm that for resources, and sometimes it's got a bit of loot in, and they've thought, what does that look like in Minecraft in 2024? You know, it really does feel like all of the elements of a dungeon are there, but just turned up to 11.
And I think it's a really good illustration of your point in response to one of our emails earlier, which is that it's a way to add all of these things and rework that player dungeon experience in Minecraft without changing the existing function of original spawner dungeons, the nostalgia of them, the excitement players have when they stumble across one and realize, oh, cool, early game, I get a skeleton spawners, everybody's dream. Like I get bone meal, I get XP. They're fun to make. They're not overly hard. They're very accessible for new players to learn how to do. It's a fun lesson in mob mechanics and stuff. Like, just all that stuff is great. I think that's a great way to pair it. Is that like it's an amped up version of the original dungeons. And despite the fact that the trial chambers are, like you said, the focus right now, they are on the bottom of the list for me, but I want to make sure that that's noted as like a personal thing. It's not that I think that they're bad, not at all. They're just not really for me, asterisks, yet.
Mm-hmm.
As a player not overly interested in PvE challenges, we've mentioned the breeze rods and the rewards and stuff are not that appealing right now. I still feel like they could add more for players to do outside of just the combat and rewards and the combat related rewards. I'd like to see more options with the breeze rods in terms of use and mechanics down the line. The heavy core doesn't seem to have any function that we're aware of outside of just being the head of the mace.
Yeah.
So again, that's not really for me, but they both have potential. Maybe they don't have to have these features added in 1.21. Maybe that's a minor update between 1.21 and whatever the next, 1.22 is. But there seems to be some thought going into that, because they changed last week a lot of the functionalities of the heavy core in terms of, waterlogged and lava proof and like that kind of stuff. So like, it kind of makes me wonder whether there's going to be something down the line. Given how difficult it is to find, and given the power that we were talking about in something like a nether beacon like structure, a heavy core being taken from the overworld into the nether for some other use and some other advantage to the player, that would be intriguing to me. Like that would push me towards like, all right, well now I really want to try a trial chamber. Um, Now, where trial chambers do appeal to me is the block resources. So if they're not something that you want to engage with in the ominous events or anything like that, that's an awful lot of copper and tough at one spot. Because the things that I've seen about these trial chambers as they've been developing over the last few months, they are really big. And if you decide either on your own that I just don't want to deal with this one, or I don't want to deal with this particular one, I will engage in the mechanics with a different one. This one is just going to be for mining and my own personal resources. My goodness, there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
We just finished talking about all the new blocks. Like you don't even have to craft them. Some of them are just in the walls. You
Yeah.
can just rip it down to the bare bones. And I think that's going to be really interesting. And I'm curious to see just how lucrative that would be, compared to, going and mining for this different stuff. And I want to call it a race, but like the experience of finding a village, finding a cartographer, getting a map, and going to a trial chamber with the express purpose of like, I'm going to ransack this and take it home in a box. That would be interesting, I think. I am curious to see what game mechanics and what other uses might come out of what I'm assuming, I don't know for sure, is the bounding box of a trial chamber or the area, because we know that no other mobs outside of the mobs that are brought in by the spawners spawn in a trial chamber. So when you remove everything, and even if you are so brazen as to also break the trial chamber spawners, then you're going to have this area that just doesn't spawn stuff. And you could then use for your own mini game, your own base that you don't have to light up and worry about different things coming in. I'm intrigued as to what might be possible in that space.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it's the equivalent of having a spawn-free environment like a deep dark biome or a mushroom fields, but like, in a sort of satellite way wherever you find them underground, and that's pretty exciting. I also noticed when I was playtesting them earlier this weekend that now that they've changed the mechanics so trial spawners only activate on line of sight, it's actually fairly easy to just block them off and prevent them from activating while you do other stuff. So if you know where they are, you can actually take a stealth approach to it, block them in so that there isn't line of sight between them and the player, and then you can do whatever you want in the surrounding area. So switching them off, instead of lighting them up, you just put blocks around them, and it's surprisingly effective. Like, I was able to wall off one of them that I didn't want to tangle with until I came back with the trial Omen effect and replay that area again. So you can do stuff like that, both to mark off where you've been and also to prevent it from becoming an obstacle on the way back out. So that's going to be a worthwhile thing to note, as long as they keep the mechanic that way, as long as they don't just switch it back to having a radius in the same way that natural dungeon spawners did. So yeah, I think the trial chambers are a really neat way of introducing gameplay features which can be much more gameplay agnostic. They're not just mechanics for the trial chambers themselves. I think wind charges are really fun to use for traversal, and I think those are going to be really important in parkour and so forth if those sort of gameplay styles get updates every so often that allow them to develop. Things like elytra being used for longer jumps, slow falling potions being introduced as effects, and the mace is going to be another thing like that, where you're going to see people using it in combat situations and to one-shot bosses and all of the ridiculous stuff. But then, like we've said before, the trick shot side of things and the parkour course side of things, where you'd have a mace and you've got to, now that it's got these new enchantments, you can use it to catapult yourself upwards in an area, and you've still got to land from there, maybe land on a slime block and keep your momentum going and that kind of thing. Those are going to be really exciting mechanics to play around with. But at its most basic, the wind charge provides one of those easy to learn, difficult to master kind of jumping techniques that when I was running around a trial chamber this weekend, I used them a bunch just to get up to high ledges because I didn't want to reach back into my inventory and get a water bucket, and I had a bunch of them on me, so I thought, sure, I'll spring myself up to this next platform to get to. And they're really fun to just casually spam while you're in there and see what you can do with them. And so I think those are going to find applications in other gameplay areas, especially since I can't remember if they can be dispensed or not, like fire charges, but I think they can. So there's room for using the wind charge explosion effect to move items around and push mobs around and that kind of thing, which you can see people using for a variety of different applications.
I can't recall whether we read this on the show or whether it's just an email that's stuck in my brain from our inbox, but noting the slower approach to Minecraft as of late by some players that do content like Hermitcraft, etc., where focusing on riding horses before you get elytra, stuff like that. I talked about the trident, I think, at some point, and I feel like the mace could be used in that way too. So like I don't know whether the mace is something that you would see yourself getting before you got an elytra, or whether you'd want to go a little bit farther and power up and stuff before you take on a trial chamber. But I feel like there's could be some fun to be had if you're taking that slower approach to exploring the overworld thoroughly before you go into the nether or go into those next phases. And I was surprised when I saw you use the mace. I think it was on a stream, jumping from rooftop to rooftop in a desert village. Like
Mm-hmm.
you really got some air and distance. Like you were able to make a good gap, more so than I thought was possible. And that to me I thought was interesting. And using that combined, with different things, it could also be enough to reduce the amount of rockets when you do have an elytra. Like if you can get yourself up 7 blocks, depending on what you're jumping off of, like you can glide for a really long time with an elytra. Going to the end to go shulker box hunting and elytra hunting, if you don't have a lot of rockets on hand, like bringing wind charges and a mace could be very interesting.
It might also be something that you can throw at shulkers from a distance to get them to teleport. I don't know how that wind charge radius really affects shulkers and mobs like that, but it might be kind of fun to mess with them and see if you can bring them down to wherever you are. There's a few other bits and pieces that are part of trial chambers, like the bogged, for example. I think those naturally have their home in trial chambers, but you'll also find them outside of those in swamps. I think they spawn in swamps and mangrove swamps now. I think they're going to be a fun addition there, much as they are a bit of a pain to fight in trial chambers, but that's usually because you're dealing with 5 or 6 of them at a time spawning from different spawners. I think they're going to be better to encounter one at a time, and you can take advantage of the fact that they shoot slow, block one arrow, and then rush them. And those, I think, once people get used to spotting them in the wild, are going to be like a fun addition just to pad out the hostile mobs that you find on the surface. On the flip side of that, I'm actually quite glad the breeze only spawns in trial chambers, because they'd be awful to fight on the surface, especially if you've got any like caves or anything near you that the breeze could knock you down into. You'll end up taking way more fall damage if you didn't have a safety floor or a ceiling above you. So I think those are going to be interesting to see if people bring them out onto the surface to do different stuff, to operate in, mob farms or mechanical things. But I think it's going to be neat to see how players decide to interact with those as they go.
Refresh my memory. Do bogged drop mushrooms or have a chance to drop mushroom on death, or is it you have to shear them to get the mushroom?
I believe you have to shear them, kind of the way mushrooms work.
Because it would be interesting if, I guess, no, they probably don't come out of they come out of trial spawners, but they don't come out of like a skeleton spawner that's in a swamp. I don't think.
They shouldn't do, no.
No. I guess if you had a traditional mob farm in a swamp, some of the mobs you're going to get are bogged. But with those kind of situations, you're not manually killing things. You're usually killing them with fall damage to try to remove the mobs from the farm as fast as possible.
I'm also wondering if you could use shears on, I don't know if it works with mushrooms, if you could use shears from a dispenser on mushrooms to shear the mushrooms off, if you could do the same thing with bogged and set up some kind of mushroom farm that way by having like a shears used on them from a dispenser. Like I think there's some neat I think it does work with a dispenser and mushrooms, so maybe it works with bogged as well. It'd be really neat to have mushroom farms innovate that way.
I know we were discussing a possibility of a way to turn skeletons into bogged in the same way that you can turn zombies into drowned, but that was just speculation on our part. That would be a fun addition, because if again, like, you're just adding more gameplay.
Yeah.
if you actually want bogged and you wanted to shear the mushrooms off of them or something, then you could have a skeleton spawner well, you have to luck out, I guess, and have a skeleton spawner in a swamp, and then you could have the bogged turn into, have the skeletons turn into bogged, unless there was another way to do it, like have a skeleton land on mud or something. Like, I don't know. I'm just trying to think about ways to do it, but it could be interesting to flesh them out a little bit more, which is a weird thing to say about a skeleton.
Yeah. The last thing I think we should briefly touch on before we wrap up today is the rework of Bad Omen, because I think one of the most significant parts about this is that it is a balancing act for raid farms now as well, because previously with stacking raid farms, the way those worked is to move the source of the raid, like the village that was part of the raid, away from the player so that it resets whether you are currently part of a raid, and then any pillager captains that spawn as part of the raid start a fresh raid, and then those just keep getting swapped in and out. And so now that Bad Omen is no longer acquired directly from pillager captains, and you need to both voluntarily drink an ominous bottle, and then the raid omen has a 30-second countdown timer before a raid actually starts, it's no longer possible to have those multiple raids going at once raid farms. Or if it is, it's going to be subject to a few extra requirements that players don't currently have contingencies for. And so that also balances out the raid farm economy, because raid farms are massive sources of emeralds and redstone dust, and they're relatively straightforward to set up. I think they've been refined over the last little while to just be remarkably simple to produce. And so I think having Bad Omen both expand into something that affects trial chambers, but also affect pillager raids to the point where it makes it more voluntary for players who are triggering them manually, but also meets out the raid farm output to the point where it feels a little bit more balanced and perhaps closer to what witch farms were able to produce in terms of redstone output and stuff. I think that's a really strong change, despite the fact that some people will be disgruntled about raid farms no longer being an easy shortcut to having, as many emeralds as you could ever want. I think it's a really good example of the way Mojang is building systems for that effort reward balance now. And I think it's something a few people in the technical community might even agree with, is that raid farms have been overpowered for a while, and it'll be interesting to get their opinion. Either have somebody on the show or hear emails from players who think that the raid farm changes are ostensibly a good thing, because I think they're a good thing for the long-term balance of the game.
Yeah, I agree. I don't even find them interesting when I see them built on a live let's play. Like, it's like, all right, well, you're gonna do this, but then you just know you no longer have to worry about emerald and redstones and a bunch of other stuff for a very long time, including totems of undying.
Yes,
there's just a lot there that I think is I don't want to say exploitative because it's in the game, but I feel like it's certainly not as intended in terms of the design of a raid. Now, on the smaller side of things, we actually have pillager patrols and raids turned off on the Citadel with game rules. And that was because we found Bad Omen and the potential of raids really annoying. As it just happens, I believe that both myself and Alistair have built our current major projects where villages used to be. And so you would get a lot of pillager patrols and a lot of engagement with that, and then you'd have to deal with that. Now, until I tore down the village, I was also dealing with the potential raid. And for me, I don't mind on a small server being able to talk to everybody and just turn that kind of stuff off. But if down the line you want to do something cool by capturing a raid mob for a mini game, doing anything like that, you have to then go through and turn back the game settings on again. This way, we could potentially have pillager raids roaming around with little to no consequence, other than ignore them if you don't want to deal with them, or engage with them as a fun little challenge and get the Bad Omen potion for later use at your own desired time.
Yeah.
And so I'd have to talk it over with everybody, but it might be something people are interested in. If you want a Ravager for some cool mini game, or fun mechanic or just something, just even just to have for flavor in your fantasy base, like whatever you're doing, then right now that's not possible on the Citadel. We have to go and change the rules. So I think adding in-game options for those kind of things is a good change.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's both slightly easier on newer players who are less familiar with Bad Omen as a mechanic, and
Totally.
then it's turning, like, I think the best way I've found of describing it is that it's turning pillager raid farms into something that requires more active participation instead of passive. It becomes an active gameplay choice instead of a passive gameplay choice. And I think that's a really great way of providing some more effort reward balance overall. But I think that's where we'll probably wrap up this discussion. Excited to hear people's thoughts on that from emails, because obviously we'll have a bunch of stuff to talk about in the near future. We're also going to be talking to Ulraf on hopefully next week's show, so if you've got any questions for Ulraf, make sure you send those to the usual email address as well. For now, though, that's going to wrap up this episode of The Spawn Chunks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud to be a listener-supported podcast. If you get some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can visit patreon.com/thespawnchunks to join our community. Pledging at any level gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can participate in things like the live show recording that happens in Discord every Monday. We also have our monthly hangouts at the end of the month where we talk about what everyone in the community has been doing in Minecraft that month. And we've got other bits and pieces coming up as well. We currently have 323 patrons, which is down one from last week. There is always room for more. Special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on social media. New episodes are available on Mondays on all of the major podcasting platforms. That includes YouTube. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked on thespawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Jonny, but online I go by PixelRiffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/PixelRiffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its third season, and I'm playing a lot on Minecraft SOS as well. I stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where I do behind-the-scenes work for the aforementioned YouTube series, and I'm the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. Aside from that, I'm at PixelRiffs on both Twitter and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything that I'm doing online can be found at joelduggan.com, including the Citadel Cafe, my other podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment, also available on all the major podcasting platforms. So pick your favorite poison and listen to the Citadel Cafe. I'm Joel Duggan on social media and Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I normally stream Thursday through Sunday, mostly building on the Citadel Minecraft server, and I've been putting in some extra time lately, so keep your eyes peeled for Tuesday and Wednesday streams now and again.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite. Seems ominous.